Nia Carter, a hard-working waitress in Brooklyn, is fired after speaking to her grandmother in Yoruba. What seemed like a simple call changed her life forever. Nia Carter had mastered the art of blending in. At 27, she worked as a waitress at Juniper and Ash, a high-end fusion restaurant nestled in a chic corner of Brooklyn. The restaurant was the type of place where you could easily spend $100 on a plate of food that would look more like an art piece than a meal. From the minimalist decor to the hand-picked wine list, it screamed exclusivity. The customers were the type who ordered from the most expensive part of the menu and never asked about prices. They spoke softly, as though their conversation was as refined as the food they were eating. It was a space where perfection was expected, and silence was a luxury. Nia didn't mind. She had found her place in this world of elegance and precision. She didn't need to stand out. She didn't need to be flashy. She was good at her job, and that was enough. She had learned early that in places like Juniper and Ash, the key to survival wasn't making waves. It was to stay efficient, stay quiet, and do your job well. That's how you earned respect here, by proving that you didn't need praise to work hard. Her uniform, black button-up shirt and apron, felt like armor. It had been a part of her for the last 3 years. She was quick, professional, always polite but never overly friendly. She never engaged in small talk unless it was required. Her co-workers knew her as the Wall because nothing rattled her. Drunk patrons spilling wine? She handled it. A dropped plate shattering on the floor? No sweat? Rude customers who barely looked her in the eye? Nia kept smiling, kept moving, kept working. She'd become an expert at reading the room, anticipating needs, and remaining invisible until she was needed. The regulars knew her by name, but only a few of them bothered to engage beyond pleasantries. She wasn't the type to make friends with customers. She was there to do a job, and that's all she wanted to be known for. A quiet professionalism that made the customers feel valued but never overserved. She was an invisible presence, always just there, making sure things went smoothly. But today was different. The lunch rush had just died down, and the restaurant felt unusually quiet. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon, the time when the few customers still lingering over their meals left, and the next round hadn't yet arrived. The rainstorm outside had cleared the usual crowd of power lunchers, leaving only a couple of tables occupied. One table was a couple arguing over a prenup, nothing Nia wanted to be involved in. The other was table 7, where Charles Remington III sat alone. Charles was a regular, the type of wealthy, high-powered customer who owned most of the space around him, including his seat at Juniper and Ash. He was a tech investor, a local power player, who liked his meals predictable and his service even more so. He was demanding, used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it. He expected nothing less than perfection from everyone around him, including the waitstaff. Nia had served Charles many times before. He wasn't exactly pleasant, but he was predictable. He liked his whiskey neat, his steak medium rare, and his water served with exactly 2 ice cubes, not 3. He came in with a different woman each time, none of whom seemed to last. He talked down to the staff, but Nia had long ago learned to ignore it. He was just another rich guy who thought he could buy everything, including respect. But Nia didn't mind. She dealt with worse. It had been a slow shift, one of those days when you could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of glass as the busboys cleaned up, but it was all so quiet and still. Charles, in his usual spot at the VIP section, was sitting alone, sipping on a neat Japanese whiskey, staring out the window at the rain as if the weather offended him. Nia didn't think much of it. Her focus was on getting the job done and keeping to her usual routine. But then, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. It was from Popo, her grandmother in Taipei. Popo didn't call often. She only reached out during emergencies or birthdays. Nia checked the time, 2:30 p.m., right in the middle of her shift. She stepped behind the service wall near the wine rack, tucked between the espresso machine and the small corner where the back office door was, just out of sight of the dining area. She answered the phone with her usual soft, respectful tone. "Popo," she said softly, switching into Yoruba without a second thought. It felt natural to her, as it always had. She'd spoken Yoruba with her grandmother her whole life, a language her grandmother had taught her when they first came to America, after the tragic loss of her parents. Nia's grandmother had raised her after her parents passed away in a car accident when Nia was just 7 years old. The bond between them was deep. Popo had taken care of her through every hardship, and no matter how busy Nia's life became, she always found time to call and check in. "How's your health, Popo?" Nia asked, her voice warm, the sound of Popo's soft chuckle echoing through the phone. "Everything's fine, but there's a mix-up with my medication," Popo replied in their shared language, her tone laced with concern. "I think the pharmacy gave me the wrong dosage. I'll take care of it tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know." It was a brief conversation, lasting only about 30 seconds. Nia reassured her grandmother that everything would be fine, promised to call back later, and reminded her to drink enough water. It was a small moment of connection, but it meant everything to Nia. It was the language of love, one that tied her to her roots and to Popo, who had done everything for her. Nia hung up the phone and slipped it back into her apron. She took a moment to collect herself, breathing deeply as she returned to the front of the house. She didn't know that someone had been listening. Charles Remington III had heard everything. From the angle where he sat at table 7, he had a clear view of Nia, and his eyes hadn't left her. He watched as she spoke into the phone, the soft tone, the words in a language he didn't understand. The flicker of discomfort was so brief, it might have been missed if you blinked, but it wasn't lost on him. His face hardened just slightly, his expression sharpening. Nia didn't notice. She was focused, doing her job as always. The next few minutes passed like any other, as she moved through the restaurant, checking on her other tables, bringing refills, and making sure everything was in order. But in the back of her mind, there was a nagging feeling she couldn't quite place. As Nia approached Charles's table to offer a refill on his water, she didn't catch the cold, appraising look he gave her. She was used to customers like him, demanding, rarely satisfied, and always looking for an excuse to complain. She didn't think it would be her turn, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. The rest of Nia's shift felt like any other. She moved between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing dishes, and serving courses with her usual precision. Charles remained in the VIP section, nursing his whiskey, staring blankly out the window as the rain turned into a light drizzle. His demeanor was the same, quiet, disinterested, but clearly expecting nothing less than perfection from the staff. Nia didn't think much of him, not anymore. He was just another wealthy customer who thought the world revolved around him, and in the world of Juniper and Ash, that was the way things worked. But something in the air felt different now. She couldn't quite pinpoint it, but as the hours dragged on, she felt a subtle shift, a weight that hadn't been there before. She was going through the motions, but every time she passed by table 7, she could feel Charles's eyes on her. There was something in his gaze, sharp, calculating, like he was waiting for her to slip up. Nia tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just her nerves, but she couldn't help but feel like something was about to happen. She finished her shift without incident, the silence stretching between her and Charles as the restaurant emptied out. It wasn't until she clocked out and was changing in the back that she saw Milo by the lockers. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, an unreadable look on his face. "D, what was that about with Charles?" he asked, his voice low but curious. Nia shrugged, her hands frozen on the zipper of her hoodie. "Nothing. He just didn't like me speaking to my grandmother in Yoruba. He didn't even say anything directly. Just made a comment, you know? Milo raised an eyebrow, his expression hardening. That's messed up, you know? The way he looked at you, like you'd just done something wrong. And Kendra didn't say anything? Nia shook her head, her thoughts swirling with frustration. Number Kendra didn't say anything. She never does. I was behind the service wall, not even on the floor. It was a private call, but he acted like I'd done something inappropriate. Milo leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. You think he's gonna complain? I mean, he's the kind of guy who likes to have control over everything, right? I don't know, Nia muttered. But it was just a call to my grandmother. No big deal. Milo didn't look convinced. He crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the room like he was weighing his options. I don't like how it felt. You shouldn't have to be ashamed of who you are or where you come from. It's not like you did anything wrong. I didn't, Nia replied quietly, a knot forming in her stomach. But I guess we'll see, won't we? She didn't think much more of it that night. After clocking out, she sent a quick message to Popo, letting her know she was fine and that she'd call back later. Nia cooked a simple dinner, something comforting, rice and stew. She called her grandmother to catch up, laughing over small things. For a moment, everything felt normal again. But the next morning, Nia woke up to a text message from the restaurant's scheduling system. It was a standard update, showing the shifts for the week ahead. She opened the message, expecting to see her name, but when she scrolled down the list, her name wasn't there. Confused, she checked again, her finger scrolling up and down in disbelief. No shift for Nia Carter. She thought it was a mistake, maybe a system glitch, so she called the restaurant to confirm her schedule. When she got no answer, she walked over to the restaurant during her lunch break. She hoped there had been a mistake. When she arrived, the door was slightly ajar. She could hear muffled voices inside, so she pushed the door open and stepped into the familiar sterile silence of the restaurant. The usual quiet hum of a restaurant preparing for its dinner rush was missing. There was no energy, no buzz. Nia made her way to the back office, where Kendra sat behind the desk. Her manager's office was tucked away in the corner, a small windowless room filled with papers, schedules, and half-drunk coffee cups. Nia knocked on the door, pushing it open. Hey, Nia began, her voice steady but uncertain. I noticed I'm not on the schedule for this week. Was there a mistake? Kendra looked up, her eyes darting to the computer screen in front of her before she glanced at Nia. She gave a tight smile but didn't quite meet Nia's eyes. Oh, Nia. I was just about to call you in. Call me in for what? Nia asked, the confusion creeping into her voice. Kendra paused, and for a moment, Nia noticed how the room suddenly felt smaller. Kendra cleared her throat, reaching for a folder on her desk, like it was her shield. She flipped it open, eyes flicking over the pages as if searching for the right words. I wanted to have this conversation face to face, out of respect, Kendra began, her voice flat, the words sounding rehearsed. Nia's gut twisted. Okay, Nia said, a knot forming in her chest. Unfortunately, Kendra continued, we've received a concern from a guest who was uncomfortable with your behavior during yesterday's shift, specifically, a phone call you took during service hours. Nia blinked, confused. A phone call? I wasn't on the floor. I was behind the service wall. It was a quick personal call, just checking in on my grandmother. There was nothing inappropriate about it. Kendra hesitated. It's not just about the call, Nia. It's about how it was perceived. There are concerns about professionalism, brand image, communication. She trailed off, her eyes flicking nervously to the folder in front of her. Nia's heart pounded in her chest. How it was perceived, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You're firing me because I spoke Yoruba to my grandmother? Kendra didn't respond. She just nodded, but it wasn't a nod of agreement. It felt like a nod of guilt. This is about keeping the image clean, Nia, Kendra added quietly. We've had a complaint from a high-profile guest. Charles Remington III is a major investor in the company. His comfort matters. The truth hit Nia like a slap in the face. She took a deep breath, fighting the sting in her chest. You're firing me because someone didn't like hearing me speak my own language. Kendra didn't meet her eyes. Nia stood up, her body stiff with a mix of disbelief and anger. I did nothing wrong, but thank you for being so upfront. I'm done here. As she walked out, her hands were shaking, but her heart was steady. She had known what was coming the moment Kendra had looked at the folder. It wasn't about professionalism. It wasn't about her work. It was about her identity. And that, she realized, was the hardest part to swallow. Nia walked out of the restaurant with her head held high, but inside, everything felt like it was crumbling. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too harsh. She stepped into the parking lot, the echoes of the conversation with Kendra still ringing in her ears. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but this wasn't just a job loss. It was a slap in the face, an undeniable message that her identity was wrong, her heritage unwanted. She tried to breathe deeply as she reached her car, but her hands were shaking. She started the engine, the hum of the car filling the silence, and pulled out of the parking lot, her mind racing. What had she done wrong? How had it come to this? It was a call to her grandmother, spoken in a language that had been part of her life since she was a child, a language that connected her to everything she held dear. But to them, it was a threat, a disruption, a mark against her professionalism. She didn't know where to go. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet. Popo would be worried, but Nia didn't want to break the news just yet. So, she drove, not knowing exactly where she was headed, but needing to be somewhere, anywhere other than the place where everything had just fallen apart. She ended up at the beach. The sand felt cool under her feet as she walked along the shoreline, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks calming her restless mind. The evening was chilly, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the bitter realization that the world wasn't as welcoming as she had hoped. Nia thought about her grandmother, the woman who had raised her with love and care, teaching her to embrace every part of who she was. Popo had never once made her feel like her language or her background was something to hide. Yet here, in a place where she had worked so hard, her identity had been rejected. She was being punished for speaking the language that's tied to her roots and her culture. The wind whipped through her hair as she stood at the edge of the water, staring out at the horizon. The city she'd worked so hard to fit into now felt so far away. Maybe she hadn't fit in at all. She was just an invisible worker, a cog in the machine that could be discarded at any moment. The people around her had never really seen her, not for who she was, only for the role she played, the service she provided. And now, that role had been taken away from her, all because of a few words spoken in a language that was a part of her soul. She stood there for what felt like hours, watching the waves crash, letting the salt air clear her mind. She didn't know what she was supposed to do next, but she knew that staying quiet wasn't the answer. She couldn't let this go, not just for her sake, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they had to shrink themselves to fit into a world that only wanted them in small doses. The next morning, Nia woke up to the usual hum of her phone. Her notifications buzzed nonstop. She had tried to avoid checking them, but she couldn't help herself. A message from Milo popped up on her screen. "Did you hear? Your story's getting out." Nia stared at the message, unsure whether to open it. She knew the news would spread. The injustice of it all was too glaring to ignore. She had been fired for speaking her own language, and in a city that prided itself on being diverse, That wasn't supposed to happen, but it had, and it was happening to more people than she realized. Milo had posted a message to a private Facebook group for service workers in the LA area, an unassuming post at first. But as soon as he hit send, the conversation spread. People who had experienced similar discrimination began to share their own stories. Nia's story wasn't just about her, it was about something much bigger, a pattern of subtle racism that many had faced but few dared to speak about. The post had quickly gained traction. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Nia opened the post, her eyes scanning the growing number of shared experiences. I lost my job for speaking Spanish at a restaurant. I was told to stop speaking my native language to my colleagues in front of customers. Same thing happened to my cousin. It's a pattern. The support was overwhelming, but the one message that caught Nia's eye was from a stranger. This is wrong. They can't get away with this. I know a journalist who'd love to hear your story. For the first time in days, Nia felt a flicker of hope. She hadn't wanted to go public. She hadn't wanted to make a scene. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. If she stayed silent, nothing would change. She took a deep breath and composed a post of her own. She didn't want to rant. She didn't want to make it sound like a sob story. She just wanted the truth to be heard. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then she typed, "My name is Nia. I was fired from my job last week from a restaurant in Brooklyn after a customer complained about me speaking Yoruba to my grandmother on the phone. I wasn't rude. I wasn't late. I wasn't unprofessional. I was just speaking to someone I love in a language that's part of me. That's all it took to lose my job. If you've ever been made to feel small because of who you are or how you speak, I see you." She clicked post and waited. The response was immediate. The likes rolled in. Comments came flooding in. Her phone buzzed as her message spread across social media, picking up momentum. By the evening, her story had reached thousands, and more people were sharing their own experiences with language-based discrimination. Journalists began reaching out. Local news stations contacted her for interviews. Support came from all corners of the country, and even internationally. Nia's name was everywhere, not as a victim, but as someone who had dared to speak up. The next day, Nia woke up to a more sobering message, an email from the restaurant's legal team. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry when she saw the subject line, "Request for conversation." The email was brief, almost robotic. "We are aware of recent attention regarding your departure from Juniper and Ash. We would like to discuss a resolution and ensure both sides are heard. Please let us know if you're open to a brief meeting. J. Roth, Legal Counsel." Nia stared at the message, her heart beating a little faster. She didn't want to meet with them. She didn't want an apology if it wasn't sincere. But she also knew that if she didn't act now, the restaurant's attempt to silence her might succeed. She closed her laptop and went for a walk, letting the fresh air clear her head. When she returned, she sent a reply. "I'll meet, but I won't settle until there's accountability. I will not remain silent." The next day, Nia woke up feeling a strange mix of empowerment and exhaustion. Her phone had continued to buzz all night. Messages from journalists, strangers offering support, friends who had shared her post, and even a few people from her past who had reached out after hearing her story. The message she'd posted had already gone viral, and now she was at the center of a conversation she hadn't expected to start, yet couldn't turn away from. As she opened her phone to check her messages, she saw the email from J. Roth, the legal counsel for Juniper and Ash, still sitting in her inbox. It wasn't much, just a formal request for a conversation. Nia wasn't sure whether to feel relieved that they were at least acknowledging her story or angry that they were only doing it because the spotlight was now on them. Milo had called her the night before. His voice had been a mixture of excitement and frustration. "You're doing it, Dee. You're showing them what's wrong with this whole system. "But are you sure you want to meet with them?" he had asked, his tone cautious. "I have to," Nia had responded. "I'm not letting them just sweep this under the rug. If they think they can erase me, erase who I am, they've got another thing coming." But now, sitting alone in her small apartment, Nia wondered what would happen next. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had been shoved into a role she never asked for. This wasn't about her being brave. It was about standing up for something bigger than herself, something that had been broken long before her phone call ever made headlines. She clicked open the email again. "We would like to discuss a resolution and ensure both sides are heard." For a second, she wondered if it was even worth meeting with them. The restaurant had already shown their true colors. The firing wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. A decision made from a place of discomfort with something they couldn't control. But Nia knew this wasn't about the restaurant anymore. It was about making sure this didn't happen to someone else. It was about proving that she could not, would not, be silenced for speaking her truth. She needed to make a statement. She needed to make sure the world knew that language, identity, and cultural pride weren't inconveniences to be overlooked. They were rights to be celebrated. Nia took a deep breath and typed out her response. She didn't write for approval. She didn't write for sympathy. She wrote for herself. "I'll meet," she replied, pressing send. "But only if this conversation happens on my terms. I want accountability, not a paycheck. No NDA, no silence. If I'm going to meet, I want a public apology for the way I've been treated. I won't accept anything less." Nia stared at the screen for a few moments, reading her words again. She had meant every single one of them. The meeting was set for the following day. Nia dressed in jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her hair tied back into a loose ponytail. She didn't feel like dressing up for them. If they wanted her to be someone she wasn't, she'd already learned that no amount of lipstick or pressed suits would change the fact that she was a woman who deserved respect for who she was. She arrived at the law office early, her steps slow but sure as she walked through the building's glass doors. She had no idea what to expect, but the weight of the decision felt heavier now that she was walking into the room where the restaurant's fate would be decided. The room was sterile. Minimalist furniture, gray carpet, the scent of polished wood and paperwork filling the space. The atmosphere was cold, calculated. Jay Roth, the legal counsel, sat behind a large, glossy desk. His appearance was as pristine as the room. Gray suit, neatly combed hair, and a look in his eyes that seemed like he was expecting a negotiation. Kendra, the restaurant's manager, sat stiffly on the other side of the room, her eyes darting between Nia and Roth, avoiding her gaze. Nia could tell she wasn't there out of conviction. She was there because she had to be. She had failed to stand up for Nia, and now she was playing the part of someone who was sorry, someone who didn't want to lose her own job in the process. Roth stood and extended a hand to Nia. She didn't shake it. She didn't need to. This wasn't about formality. This was about truth, about getting what she deserved. "Ms. Carter," Roth began, his voice smooth but rehearsed, "we want to offer our sincerest apologies for the situation that's occurred. We understand that the termination of your employment has drawn a great deal of public attention, and we wish to address the matter directly." Nia remained standing, arms crossed. "Apology accepted," she said, but her voice held no warmth. "But I'm not here for your apologies. I'm here to make sure you understand what was wrong, what still is." Roth's eyes narrowed slightly, as though he hadn't expected this confrontation to be so direct. Kendra shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but said nothing. "I'm not here to accept money," Nia continued. "I'm here because what happened to me was wrong. I was fired for speaking to my grandmother in a language that's part of who I am. That's not professionalism. That's discrimination, and that's why I won't be silent." Roth's face tightened, but he kept his composure. "Of course, Miss Carter. We fully acknowledge the sensitivity of this issue. We are offering a settlement for your grievances, along with a formal statement of apology. However, we ask that you understand that our brand's image was compromised by what occurred. Your brand's image? Nia repeated, a sharp edge to her voice. So, my identity is a threat to your image? Me speaking my native language in a restaurant that serves Asian fusion dishes is a threat? There was a pause, a shift in the air. Kendra looked down at her lap, her face red. Nia could feel the silence growing between them, thick and suffocating. This is not about your identity, Ms. Carter, Roth finally said, but there was a hesitancy in his tone. This is about maintaining consistency and comfort for all of our guests. We have a very specific clientele that we cater to, and I don't care about your clientele, Nia interrupted, her voice rising slightly. You can cater to whoever you want, but no one gets to decide how I speak to the people I love. The room was silent for a moment, and Roth seemed to reconsider his position. Kendra shifted in her seat again, this time looking directly at Nia for the first time. I understand, Kendra whispered. I should have spoken up. I just didn't want to lose my job. Nia's eyes softened, but only slightly. You didn't lose your job. You just stayed silent when you should have spoken up for what was right. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, Roth cleared his throat. Miss Carter, if you'll accept the settlement, we will also issue a formal public apology. We will take responsibility for how we handled this situation, and we will review our diversity and inclusivity policies moving forward. Nia took a deep breath. She had been ready for this. Fine, she said, her voice steady. But you need to be clear about why I was fired. I want the public statement to say that I was let go because someone didn't like hearing me speak my native language. No NDA, no silence. I want the world to know what happened. After a long pause, Roth nodded. We can agree to that. Nia didn't smile. She didn't need to. The battle was far from over, but she had made a small victory. She stood up, straightening her shoulders. Good. Now, if that's all, I'll be leaving. As she walked out of the office, her heart was still racing, but for the first time in days, she felt free. She had spoken her truth. She had made them listen. And that was all that mattered. Pull of something bigger. She had been given a platform, whether she wanted it or not, and she knew she couldn't waste it. One afternoon, Nia called her grandmother. It was one of those rare moments when she just wanted to hear Popo's voice, to seek comfort in the familiar, to hold on to something solid amidst all the chaos. Popo, it's me, Nia said, when her grandmother picked up the phone. Ah, Nia, my girl, how are you? Popo's voice was soft, laced with concern. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Nia smiled despite herself. I'm okay, Popo. Just a little tired. I'm proud of you, Popo said. You've always had a strong voice, even when you were small. Don't let them take that away from you. Nia let out a shaky breath, the weight of her grandmother's words settling into her chest. It's just, I never thought it would come to this, you know? I didn't think I'd be the one who had to stand up for something like this. You are who you are, Popo replied, her voice firm but gentle. And that's never been wrong. You speak your truth, Nia. That's all that matters. After their conversation, Nia felt a surge of clarity. Popo was right. She didn't need to hide who she was anymore, and the world could either accept it or not. But she wouldn't shrink herself for anyone. Later that evening, Nia sat down at her small kitchen table with her laptop open, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had spent days debating what to do next. Part of her wanted to walk away from it all, to just go back to being invisible. But another part of her, the part that felt stronger now than it had in days, knew she couldn't do that. The truth had been shared, and now it was her responsibility to keep pushing forward. She began typing. I was fired for speaking Yoruba on the phone with my grandmother. And that's wrong. It's not about me being unprofessional. It's about being made to feel ashamed of who I am. Language isn't just a tool for communication. It's a part of who we are. And no one should be punished for speaking in a language that connects them to their heritage. I've spent my whole life learning how to shrink myself to fit in, but I won't shrink anymore. I will speak, loudly, and I will keep speaking until no one else has to face what I did. Nia clicked post and sat back in her chair, a mix of relief and uncertainty flooding through her. This time, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been told to be quiet, to be smaller, to blend in. Almost immediately, the comments began rolling in. The likes piled up. People were sharing their own stories again, stories of being told to speak only English, of being punished for accents, of being marginalized for speaking the language of their culture. Nia's words had sparked something. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. A conversation was happening, and it was far bigger than she ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Nia's story continued to spread. Journalists interviewed her. She appeared on podcasts, talking about the intersection of language, culture, and discrimination. But the real change came when people started reaching out to her, telling her how her story had empowered them. People shared how they had started speaking their native languages more proudly at work, how they had confronted racism they had previously ignored, and how they had found the courage to be themselves in spaces where they once felt invisible. One day, a local organization dedicated to advocating for racial and cultural equality reached out to Nia. They wanted to honor her work, to thank her for her courage in speaking out. They offered her a chance to continue her advocacy, to make sure this kind of discrimination was addressed in the workplace. At first, Nia hesitated. She had never seen herself as an activist. But after everything she had been through, she realized that this was her calling. She couldn't stay silent anymore. And so, she accepted. She wasn't just going to take what had happened and move on. She was going to make sure it didn't happen again. Through her advocacy, Nia began speaking at events, teaching others how to assert their rights and demand respect, no matter where they worked or what language they spoke. She was no longer just Nia the waitress. She was Nia the voice for change, and every time she spoke, she made sure that someone else would never have to feel invisible again. Nia stood in front of a crowd at a community event, her heart beating with a mix of nervousness and excitement. She was no longer the quiet waitress at Juniper and Ash. She was a speaker, an advocate, a voice for the many people who had experienced what she had. The room was packed with people of all backgrounds, many of whom had been inspired by her story. They had heard her words, felt the weight of her journey, and were now looking to her for guidance, strength, and hope. Nia took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. "I never thought it would come to this," she began, her voice steady, carrying the weight of everything she had been through. "I never thought I'd be standing here, not as a victim, but as someone who could make change. But here we are, and I'm not alone anymore." She paused, scanning the room. None of us should have to shrink ourselves for anyone. Our culture, our language, our identity. These are the things that make us who we are. And it's time we stop apologizing for it. The crowd erupted into applause, and Nia felt a swell of pride. It was a strange feeling, pride mixed with the deep understanding of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. As she spoke, the memories of the past few weeks flashed before her eyes. The firing, the online backlash, the apology, the whirlwind of attention. But more than anything, she felt empowered. The truth had set her free, not only from the job that tried to silence her, but from a lifetime of shrinking to fit in. Nia wasn't just reclaiming her own voice anymore, she was giving it to others. She was turning a painful moment into something powerful, something that would resonate for years to come. "I won't stay silent anymore," she finished, her voice stronger than ever. "And neither should any of you." The room stood, clapping, shouting, celebrating the strength they all shared. Nia knew this was only the beginning. Her voice, once silenced, had found its place in the world, and now it was time to amplify it, loud, proud, and unapologetic.